thank you for coming today to the Blanden Art Museum. So nice to see all these wonderful faces here to come and enjoy some wonderful art and listen to some words of wisdom from an artist that traveled all this way to come speak with us today. So just a little bit about the Art Museum. You know, you can always find out about all of our events and programming by becoming a member. So if you're not a member yet, please consider becoming one. By being a member, you help support a lot of the program and events that we put on here at the museum. And there's a couple different ways of finding out more information about that. You can go to our website, blanden.org, or we do have pamphlets at the front desk or on the table on your way out if you go out through the East door. So if you're interested in becoming a Blanden or want more information about that, that's two good ways to get that information. So please consider that. Also too, another great way to keep up with what's going on here at the museum is to follow us and like us on Facebook. We post a lot of things there, and so it's a great resource to find out things that are happening with both the art classes, different exhibits, and different, you know, sometimes we put up a spontaneous painting or two to kind of bring people in. And so that's a great way to engage with the community that way. So if you're not one of our friends, please do that on Facebook. And then additionally, this talk, along with some of the talks in the past, we will be adding into our YouTube channel. And so you're able to watch this one later on or others that we've done in the past by going to YouTube, and you just type in Blanden Art Museum and you'll find our channel. And we have a bunch of different resources there, not only art talks, but also some digital classes that you can kind of watch and take at your leisure. So those are some really great ways to interact with the Blanden when you're sitting at home in your lazy boy or on your couch and don't want to go out into the world. And we would appreciate that you would engage with the museum through those mediums, as well as coming here in person. We'd rather have you in person, but if you're using our resources, that's great too. So again, thank you today for attending the event, the artist reception for this amazing exhibit by Dr. Carrmon Slater, who is here to talk to you today. It's a magnificent display of kind of quilting artistry and creativity that Carrmon has produced over several years. After reading his bio, I think it states like 37 years you've been producing artwork, I think, at some stage. So Dr. Slater's work are fantastic assemblages of color, pattern, and texture, you know, providing the viewer the intimate inspiration and warmth and comfort. As you spend time with these works, you'll find that they open up a world of relationships, connections between small elements of color, fabric, and stitching, and how all those come together to establish the whole, or what we see as the piece. And so with that, I'd invite Carrmon to come on up. So let's invite him.
Does that work okay?
If you want to put that in your pocket, or you can sit right there.
I'll set it right here.
Okay.
All right. I'm not used to microphones. I grew up with the Ethel Merman tradition of theater where you know how to project your voice through the back of the room. I was also a teacher, so I know how to make my voice work. But anyway, we've got it and we'll use it. I thank you all for being here, and I'm going to start off to thank Eric and his staff for taking a chance on me. I met Eric from Legacy Learning that was run by Maureen Siemens out of Webster City, and I spoke at that meeting, and Eric obviously picked me up there with the help, obviously, of Maureen. So I thank Eric and all of his staff and volunteers who went through all the work to curate and select the pieces that you're seeing today. And believing me, I'm glad Eric took a chance and believed in me after hearing me and made this selection. I also have to thank my partner of over 50 years who passed away nearly a year ago, Donald. We spent many, many years in Ames, Iowa, and then moved to Colorado, back to Ames, Iowa, and then we retired in Colorado. He was an inspiration to me, was extremely one of the kindest, most gentle people you would ever know, and has supported me all these many years in not only my creativity, but my professionalism throughout everything else that I do. I have to thank my parents, who had this precocious child who was curious and interested in so many, many different things and never dissuaded me from anything. They were always there to support me. And this is an artistic endeavor, and I've always been an artist even as a young child, but I'm actually trained in the sciences. And so I've given many, many talks about the relationship of science and art and why people think they're so disparate when they really aren't. The creative components are the same. And the scientist works with data bits, and the artist works with sensory bits, and the creative person is the person that's able to look at those and see things that many, many other people can't see, and that those are the breakthroughs that we make. Einstein once said, "I could never have come up with the theory of relativity if I had not been a violinist." So the arts are extremely important. I'd also like to thank Jan Alvestead and Kay Westman, who were colleagues of Donald's in the veterinary biologics program in Ames, Iowa, and were so supportive and helpful to him over so many, many years, and have also done the same for me in retrospect. I also thank Maureen Siemens and Joanne Hendricks, who were artistic colleagues through many, many years. Maureen lives here, Joanne is in Minneapolis, St. Paul, both artists, and we've been a trio of supportive people to each other for many, many years, and I could not be where I am without the support and interaction that I've had with those two individuals. I'd also like to thank the doctors and university administrator wives of Ames, Iowa, who took me under wing. This is something that most people are unaware of, and integrated me into the civic life of Ames, Iowa, made sure I was on many, many boards. I was appointed to the very first Ames Civil Rights Task Force by the mayor as a result of their efforts, primarily Dee Hegstrom and Susie Zaffarano, and consequently was given a key to the city and also received the local treasure award from the city at that time. And most importantly, and certainly not least, I have to thank my dear friend Keith Billick, I've known him since he was a student at Iowa State. We share the creative spirit. We speak the same language, and best friend just really does not convey the bond that the two of us have. And consequently, I also have to thank his parents for bringing such an incredible, genius, talented, and gifted individual into this world, and to be able to share him with me. So from there, then we look at all of this work and say, so how does this all connect? So I'll give you just a little brief history of my growing up. I grew up here in Iowa. My parents had me starting a young marriage. They were running a dairy farm in the very inner city of Waucheer, Iowa, milked by hand, and delivered the milk to all the residents of the city. And my mother always said that I had raised myself, because up until the age of when I started school, I really spent a lot of time on my own. They probably would be turned in for child abuse now. But it was a small town, everyone knew who I was. I could walk naked up the main street of Wattier, Iowa, and everyone knew who I was and where I was and would steer me in the right direction. But my job was always to walk up to my grandmother's, who lived up on a hill quite a distance away. But I would oftentimes get diverted with my interests. I remember there was a St. Bernard on the way up, and quite often I would leave things that I was supposed to take to my grandmother on the doghouse, and I would still be at the doghouse when I was supposed to be at my grandmother's. And one time, there was a butchery on Main Street, Wattier, and one time I got interested in butchering. And so they were looking all over town. Did he make it up there, No, I haven't seen him. And they found me there. So anyway, when I started to school, my parents were able to get out of the dairy, which is a 24/7 occupation, and they bought 160 acres north of Sigourney, Iowa. So I'm sure they struggled for many years trying to get a farm on its feet. And I went directly into first grade and spent 6 years in elementary school there. And then I think because I never knew we were somewhat poor, growing up on a farm, very rich environment, lots of animals, and you have responsibility, so you can't be sick. You always have to take care of animals. You have to get up and do your chores. And I would have to do my chores before I could catch the school bus in the morning. So I started school in Sigourney, and I actually had the run of the high school. Being a small school, the things that I was able to do, you'd never be able to do today. I was actively involved in drama, both vocal music, band music, science, square dance club, and at that time we had 4 subjects, and then there was study hall. Well, I never had study hall because I was always in one of those other rooms, or I was with the upperclassmen. There were two upperclassmen, and we'd spend a lot of our time growing cultures in the back of the science room, having access to the microscope back there. So this is the science background that becomes part of the work that you're seeing. And Mr. Hoffman would send a microscope home with me for the summer. That probably would never happen now. So the science and the arts were always a major tug for me. And we'd had no art program at that time, and yet the women's PE person recognized my artistic talent and would often submit my work to scholastic and other kinds of art endeavors that other kids would not have had access to unless they were in a school that had an art program. So from there, then, I went on to the university. I started out as a piano vocal major, and after a semester, the science part of me broke loose, and I went into the sciences and got all of my degrees. I concentrated in zoology and botany for a master's degree, and invertebrate paleontology for my doctoral work with the idea of science education. So I spent many years while I was going to school also teaching science in the Iowa City public schools, thinking I would never leave dear Iowa City, this intellectual oasis in Iowa. And then I met Donald, and he lived in Ames, Iowa. So I moved to Ames and went there as a project coordinator for Project ECO, which was one of 5 federal environmental education programs in the country. And we had 2 school buses that we would pick up a group of, it was a K-12 program. We'd pick up a group of students for the day and go out into the field. And the idea of we had 2 semi-trailers that were converted into mobile laboratories. And the idea behind that was that we could not impact any given park or nature preserve forever and ever. So they would have a spring, a winter, and a fall experience, each grade, and we didn't impact any one area. It could be a forest environment, a river environment, a quarry kind of environment. And so I did that for many, many years. And then I ended up teaching 5th grade, which was absolutely my most favorite age group to teach. because all of the many, many parts of me, including my love of mathematics, could come together. And I always did a musical with them. I did, rather than, I did a science, not a science fair with them, but they actually had to do actual research, like a real scientist would do. And I had a lot of ways that I led into that so that they weren't in the dark. And they would conduct their research, and then they had to write it up like a regular science paper. And then I had one of the high school science teachers come in, and they had to actually present their research like a regular scientific conference, rather than just having a booth at a science fair and that kind of thing. So that was a little different approach to my dealing with fifth graders in the realm of science. So I've always done art, even as a youngster. And my mother and grandmother were both quilt makers. And my grandmother was so particular that she would take out my mother's stitches overnight until my mother got good enough to actually do really fine quilting. So my mother made a lot of my clothes growing up, and so I learned to use a sewing machine, being interested in all kinds of things. And I think that's probably, I didn't focus on quilting for many, many years. I've worked in clay, I've worked in glass, I've done a lot of woodwork, but I finally in the last probably decade settled in on textiles, and this has led into what you're seeing today. So a lot of inspirations are from science. And I took a class in painting at Iowa State with Betty Miller, and one of her assignments dealt with architecture in painting, and so that was the inspiration for this one. Quite often I like the quilt medium as an art medium rather than particularly a quilt per se, because of its tactility and the vibrancy of its color. And I usually like to do challenges. So that one was the challenge of being able to insert that circle in that matrix without any puckers. And you know how fabric can stretch, so there could be no stretch. So that was one of the challenges of that one, plus dealing with architectural elements and subjects. I create a lot of my own fabrics because I can't find them. And if you looked at current textiles, you can look at them and you can almost see your hand behind them because they're so thin, they're almost like gauze. So it's really hard to find good cottons now. So therefore, and I also have a place that prints fabrics for me if I don't make them myself. And the one back there of the Jackson Pollock piece, I had a woman that was 100 and some, she lived to be 104 or 5, and her son and daughter-in-law, the one that gave me the flowers out front, who was a Depression-era woman and never gave anything away. So she saved, I got all of her buttons and all of her ribbons that she had saved all those many, many years. And so that's how I use those. And then I had a woman in the Martha Graham dance company. Her mother lived in Japan. She was Japanese. And when her mother died, she sent me this huge box of silks. And every little scrap of paper, fabric, to them is sacred. Some of them, I'm sure, were antique. Some of them had gold fibers in them. And so I sat on that box for a long, long time and then finally opened it up and began to create. My favorite thing is to work with scraps without a preconceived notion of what I'm going to do or where I'm going with it. And like a painting, it tells you what should come next. So that's basically, and you see a lot of grasses. Prairie has always been a major inspiration to me. I remember in Iowa City teaching science and finding all those remnant prairies around cemeteries or road cuts and things like that, where there were still remnants of what Iowa used to look like. And so I did a whole prairie series, and there's one back there, but not all of those made it. And this one here, I like a challenge, as I said, and this one became a study in black and white with one or two colors. And so that's, and I'm always interested in using quilt forms in ways that other people do not, and so that's how this mobile. So I sent two mobiles, but this is the one that they decided to hang in the exhibition. So with that, if anyone has any specific questions or any piece, I would be more than happy to address those, or questions about me or my journey. It's been a very rich life.
Can you talk more about making your own fabrics? Like you weave, or do you dye them?
There was a whole period of my work, and none of that's represented here. In fact, that whole show went to New Zealand, where I was working with dyes like watercolor. And the reason I went, I was invited by the New Zealand Craft Council to be their keynote speaker when the German dyes became available in small enough quantities that artists could obtain them rather than commercial ventures. And so I would work with being able to control the flow just like you do with watercolor. I do a lot of printmaking with objects or screens. In fact, I think some on that back quilt are from that printing. These were screen printed. The images there were from a physics professor at Iowa State. And he produced a lot of imagery from his research and gave me a lot of those images that I could make screens with. This is a pair of jeans that I took dye reduction, take the dye away rather. Jan, what's that called?
The bleaching?
Taking the dye away from a color, bleach out. That's what I'm thinking of, yeah. Thank you.
Carrmon, can you talk a little about your process with floor coverings?
Oh, I did a whole period, yeah. That was because I was interested in textiles and the elitism of the art world. You're either an oil painter or you're nothing, basically. And so I reacted to that, and I said, well, I'm doing the same things. You can just walk on the damn things then. And I started doing a series of floor coverings, and then I realized there's a long history of floor coverings out of England. There was a guild, and there were a number of people throughout the country that were doing floor canvases. And then I was invited to a conference on the East Coast with people that were doing those, and I spoke at that. So I had a whole period of that. I did a whole period of wearables.
I do have a question. On average, how long does it take for you to create a piece?
Well, once I have a direction here, hiking and walking, being in nature is my think time, and also my inspiration time. Especially if you've got a dog with you. And once I think through something or start it, then I'm like a demon, and I may not eat, I may not sleep, but I just go. So everyone always wants to know, well, how long did it take you to do that? And it's in spurts, or it's been a marathon, so it's hard to give a good answer to that, I'm sorry.
That's a great answer.
Yeah. Question?
When you say sometimes you create your own fabric, how far back do you go? You don't raise cotton in Ames,
Oh, no.
What do you mean you create your own fabric?
Well, I'm either dyeing, not just dyeing at a color, but using it like watercolor.
But you start with a cotton.
Yeah, I started with a
first,
cotton. Yes.
And then you
A
dye.
good cotton. Yes.
Probably asked you this before, but when you're working on a piece like the one behind you with the small pieces, for a piece like your prairie one,
Yes.
do you have an idea of the proportions of colors that you want to use, or is it just instinctive that you just see it as you go?
It's instinctive with me. And my favorite thing, especially if I'm working in glass, I don't like big sheets of glass that I have to cut and do that. Just give me all your scraps. And then I start working with scraps. In fact, the little piece over here are remnants of other pieces. It's made from scraps. And the background of the jeans piece here are all scraps. I'm working with half-inch pieces.
So do you plot it out on paper first?
Sometimes, but I've done lots of sketches, and I may do parts of something, but not the whole thing. It varies. Sometimes I do draw out a bit, but not graphically. I just have a general plan in mind, and then it takes a direction of its own once I get started. Good question.
So Carrmon, like the piece behind you with the half-inch strips,
Yes.
do you lay those out and then rearrange, or just lay those out and sew?
I just start grabbing.
That's nice.
Yeah. And then they all fit together in the end. It works for me.
That must be the mathematical mind.
The what?
It's the mathematical mind at work.
Yeah, I love
I can't do
mathematics.
that.
Mathematics is the language of science. And then I also used to tell my students, I said, but you also have to have the language that you speak. You have to be able to communicate in that language as well. And that's where a lot of science people have trouble. In fact, I spent several years as a medical writer at the University of Iowa translating technical research into lay language. And the reason they hired me to do that was because I was a teacher. And that's why as a science teacher, supposedly you're supposed to be able to do that for kids. I find it, with working with kids in science, it's not me telling them all that I know. It's opening the doors for them to discover science on their own.
Do you still have a microscope that you use for inspiration?
No, I don't have that science teacher to give me the microscope. I did have 2 antique microscopes, which I gave to the nephews. Yeah, and I thank Donald's family, because Donald's family became my family. And Tom, Shannon, and Sam are back there. They came all the way from Michigan, and I love them dearly.
Can you tell us a little bit about your workspace? Like, I see some of the smaller scale, you can picture pieces and picture you working on those, but I'm trying to picture you piecing pieces like this all together.
At the time that I did this one, I had a studio on the top floor of a building in Ames. And I had a big 12-foot table that's padded, so you can stick pins in it, print on it, and all that kind of thing. So I had the space to do that. In one house in Ames, I had a great studio down in the basement. And then when I designed and built the house that we had in Evergreen, I actually built a lovely studio, which I miss. And the couple that bought it, she is also an artist and wanted to keep the table that I built in there and uses at her studio now. Now I'm using a second bedroom as a studio. That's the reason I'm starting to work tiny. I used to work huge, and now you see a lot like the little pieces here. But it doesn't use enough of my scrap and my fabric stash.
What was your inspiration in creating the 3 pieces behind you, the warrior?
The which?
The words, the three pieces.
Oh. Well, the but one is when you I'm a language person as well as science, and so whenever you use but in a sentence, you may as well have not said everything before. And so you see that's all pretty obscure and dark. And Eric likes that piece apparently. And also, like, I've been on many boards, many times president, currently president of the Active Adult Center in Wheat Ridge. I've seen poor leadership and I've seen excellent leadership. So that's an important component of me, and so that's how I did the leadership piece. And too often it's not good. Gene?
I think you need to tell them about your house in Colorado, because it's a work of art, the one you sold.
Oh,
And you need to tell them about the center part. You need to tell them about that.
Okay. Well, when we moved back to Ames for Donald's job with the biologics program, they centralized again rather than decentralized. And we knew we wanted to go back to Colorado in retirement. So it took me 3 years to find 7 acres in the mountains on a very steep hillside with a big rock outcrop in the back. I was looking for water, aspen, and rock outcrops, and I managed to get most of those components. And we had a great framed view of Mount Evans, snow-capped Mount Evans at the end of the valley, up the valley. And so, with those parameters in mind, then I designed the house around the hillside. And in the inner core, I had what I called a conservatory, which we just built around the hillside. It's enclosed and got a roof, so it's winter accessible. And I could compost without having to worry about the bears. And had a bridge going over to the guest quarters on the other side so they didn't have to see me if they didn't want to. And so they had the sunrise end and we had the Mount Evans view. So I designed it so that the living room, dining room, kitchen, and bedroom all had great views of Mount Evans. It's very contemporary. What else can I say, Gene?
I think I've not covered it.
Had lots of decks, which all had to be shoveled off when we got set 9-foot snows.
You can tell them also about the fox you used to be.
Oh yeah, I love animals. I grew up with animals, and I had a fox that would come up. He would beat me. He would see me coming up the driveway and beat me to the door, which was up on the top, up upper level, and would come and very gently take an egg out of my hand, not that kind of a bite at all, just very gentle, and take an egg out of my hand or get a biscuit, a dog biscuit that I had for him. Called him Mr. Foxy. and then a good friend of mine did glass sandblasting with animals and things in it, and so she did the shower doors that I currently have with Mr. Foxy at the bottom.
Also, Don was in his office, down to see Janet, and he says, Gene, come in here a minute. Finally, and he said, I'm wondering about these shingles. You can get 20 years and 30 years. And I said, you don't have to worry about that, Don. How old are you?
I know you like birds. I wonder if you can think of ways that birds have found their way into your art.
That what now?
How birds, I know you like birds.
Oh, birds, yeah,
birds have
bird
found-
watching, yeah.
Just how has that found its way into your art?
Well, I look for bird fabrics. or I take pictures of birds, or I find pictures, or people give me pictures, and then I have them printed. You don't see any of those here. I did the birds of the Bear Creek watershed up in Evergreen, and they did it as a raffle, a fundraiser basically for Evergreen Audubon. And those were all the birds from the Evergreen watershed. I've done, and then I did, this was a commission for a family in Maui that, and she was into native plant, because the Hawaiians are interested in native plants, not all the invasives or things that have been brought in. And so I did that for them with just all native plants and the blossoms. And her husband was a painter, and one of the images in the center was actually a plant that is now extinct. So that is permanently in that quilt now. I've operated primarily by commission and word of mouth. Galleries don't handle this kind of work by and large. It's too large and space is costly, and so the gallery scene, I have an extensive exhibition record, but not so much dealing with galleries.
What you said about the oil artist or nothing, that comment kind of made me think, for so many years and generations, quilting, you kind of think of it as, or textile work in general, as generally more like what women would work on, and sort of like humble and practical.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about what your thoughts are about the dichotomy of that history versus something so grand like exhibitions in New Zealand and the beauty of the, quilts hanging on the wall versus being kind of more humble at the end of the bed.
Yeah. We hope that's changing. But I'm comfortable. I'm not afraid to be in a fabric store.
I just think about, personally, my grandmas and my mom creating beautiful works, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. And, stuff at the county fair and that kind of thing. And
Well,
it's really neat that you're bringing, appreciation for the artistry that it is.
Yeah, the art quilt movement, basically. Yeah. And there is an organization called that, the Art Quilt. Yeah. Yes.
You were talking to a fifth grader who was thoughtful and curious about many different things. What would you say to them?
Be yourself, be true to yourself. You have to find your true self in there somewhere. Being an only child, I learned to be comfortable with myself and confident with myself. I spent well, my mother said I raised myself, but that's obviously not true. I also grew up with a horse. When we moved to Sigourney, my uncle had a horse, and it was going. If it had a colt, I was supposed to get it, but he believed never to give anything away, so I had to pay him $1. So I got the colt, and I had to train it, and so I grew up with that horse. I had to ride after the cows to bring them in for milking, and I had to do all that before I caught the school bus in the morning. So that was my companion. She heard all my tales of woe, and my joys, my sorrows. But we have sheep, and all kinds of birds, and so it was a very rich growing up. I wrote the other thing that I often talk about to kids about is if I'm not around to give you an assignment, where does that assignment come from? what motivates you? And I said, well, they have to come from here. So when I'm not around, you have to give yourself things that you want to accomplish. And so what will those be?
Would you talk about your work with church commissions?
Oh, yeah. I've become known for liturgical clothing. I've done numerous stoles for various denominations. I've done the full garments and things. So I like working with specific clients that are interested in whatever it is, and then what budget do they have, and what would be their goal, and then that gives you the parameters within which you have to work, and that's always a good challenge for me. I love that.
Any other questions for
That'd be pretty original.
Carrmon? Otherwise, Carrmon,
Thank you very much.
thank you. Well, thank you again for coming and spending the afternoon with us here at Blanden. I think there's still plenty of refreshments out there, so go ahead and help yourself, and hopefully we'll see you next time. If you're interested in coming back, seeing another artist talk, we have another one in September. September 16th, we'll have an artist from Lincoln, Nebraska, who's a painter, who will be on the second floor. So you're welcome to come back. Otherwise, thank you very much.